And President Trump has a message for our trading partners and allies at the G7 about fairness. Good morning. I'm Maria Bartiromo. Thanks for joining us. This is Sunday Morning Futures. Both President Trump and Kim Jong-un are now on the ground in Singapore ahead of their first ever face-to-face meeting. The president appears optimistic going into the high-stakes meeting. But what kind of deal is the commander-in-chief hoping to strike with the North Korean dictator? Senator Lindsey Graham of the Armed Services Committee will join me momentarily. DOJ Inspector General Michael Horowitz is set to unveil his findings on how the FBI and the Department of Justice handled their investigation into Hillary Clinton in 2016. And then heads to Capitol Hill to explain them. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte will be one of the first lawmakers to question Horowitz. And he will be here with me first to tell us what he wants to hear. And a tense meeting between President Trump and fellow G7 members ends on uncertain terms when it comes to tariffs and trade. Canada's former Prime Minister Stephen Harper is here, joining us live on what it all means for your bottom line. We're looking ahead right now on Sunday Morning Futures. And the countdown is on until President Trump meets face-to-face with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. The two leaders arriving in Singapore just this morning. We showed you the pictures. They are set to meet in person on Tuesday. Let's bring in Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. He serves on the Senate Armed Services as well as Judiciary and Budget Committee. Senator, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Pretty incredible morning this morning ahead of this meeting.
Yeah.
Your reaction?
It's amazing. It's a direct result of a maximum pressure campaign. The only reason North Korea is sitting down at the table with Trump is that they believe for the first time that they've got somebody in the White House they don't know how to deal with. And Trump's goal is to eliminate their nuclear missile program, not contain it. And I think he's got North Korea and China's attention. And what would a good deal look like? I want to tell you this. 7 Democratic senators, Senator Schumer led the effort, wrote a letter to President Trump. I have it right here. In this letter, they lay out what a good deal would look like. Give up your nuclear weapons, give up your enrichment program, dismantle your missile capability, anytime, anywhere inspections, any place in North Korea, verifiable. I embrace that letter as a good deal. Now, here's my challenge. Telling the President of the United States what a good deal would look like is very good, but you got to help him get that deal. You got to help the President convince North Korea and China that this program is going to come to an end, hopefully peacefully, but there's no more kicking the can down the road. So here's my challenge to every Democrat and Republican. You need to help the President where you can, not undercut him. Writing a letter telling him what a good deal it should be is good, only if you're willing to back it up with the use of military force. There's no way North Korea is ever going to give up their program unless they believe nuclear military forces on the table. So I'm asking every Democrat who wrote that letter and all my Republican colleagues to tell North Korea and China that if diplomacy fails, we will have the President's back. We'll authorize to use military force as a last resort to stop the nuclear threat in North Korea to the American homeland and the world at large. And if we're not willing to do that, we're never going to get a good deal.
Because we know the pressure works. That kind of pressure, the UN sanctions, U.S. sanctions, has helped. Look, you have to be optimistic about where we are right now.
Yeah,
this president having gotten this North Korean leader to the table is good. But as you say, there's a lot to do and a lot to get done. So how do you convince this dictator to do just that? I mean, what are the practical steps, in your view, that this president can use as tools?
Well, number one, we're not going to let this drag on forever. That I want a win-win. I'm willing to sign a peace treaty to end the Korean War with you, China, and South Korea. I'm willing to guarantee the security of your regime. I'm not here to spread democracy to North Korea, to unify South Korea and North Korea. I'm here to end your nuclear program, your missile program, in a win-win fashion. We need the Congress involved. Democrats never wrote a letter to Obama about what a good deal would look like. I'm really surprised they wanted to do it to Trump, but I'm glad they did, and I'm going to embrace this letter. I hope the president will. But how do you convince North Korea that America's different? Is to have the Congress having President Trump's back, pursuing peace, but let North Korea know that if peace fails, if you play the same old games of talking about giving up your program and backing out and building it up, we're going to use military force to stop this threat as a last resort. So put in place a mechanism for the next year to implement the Schumer letter.
This would be an incredible change to what we've seen in North Korea and obviously the North Korean economy. So this will take structural change over a period of time. Estimates are that this country spends 30 to 50% of its state funds on the military, on its nuclearization program, correct?
Yeah, and in the letter by Schumer, they say give up all your plutonium and your uranium. Well, if you're serious about ending your nuclear program, you don't need plutonium and uranium. We should be able to do that in pretty quick order. The goal here is to dismantle your nuclear program, give up your nuclear weapons, and give up your ballistic missile program. In return, get security guarantees and economic assistance. I agree with the Democratic letter as what a good deal would look like, but I'm here to tell you and everybody else, North Korea is not going to change the way they do business unless they believe that the military options on the table. President Trump, if he has to, will use military force to end this threat to the American homeland. I want my Democratic colleagues not just telling him what a good deal would look like, but having his back, telling North Korea and China, yes, even the Congress believes it's got to come to an end one way or the other, and Congress prefers diplomacy, supports diplomacy, but we will back our president to end this program by military force as a last resort if we have to. If that were said clearly, then I think we got a good chance to get a good deal. If they're not willing to say that, then they're undercutting President Trump and really stabbing him in the back, which means that we're more likely to have a war.
Well, you are portraying a very clear and serious message. You want your Democratic colleagues to get behind this president.
And Republicans.
And Republicans to support this president. Have you seen that even a little on the left so far?
No, I said this just a few minutes ago, and everybody went nuts on the left. But here, you can't have it both ways. You know, I don't know why they wrote this letter. They sure as hell didn't write one to Obama. I don't know if they're playing a game. I'm going to take them at their word that this letter actually lays out a plan I could support. I'm going to adopt this letter as the American position with some minor changes. Here's the question. Are you willing to do what you can to make sure we achieve peace, not war? The best way to get peace, not war, is to convince North Korea that they're going to be in a war and they will lose it if they don't pursue peace. Everything else before has failed. Nobody in North Korea believed that the past presidents would use military force. If they don't believe Donald Trump will use military force as the last resort, the people in North Korea are making a very big mistake, because he will if he has to. He doesn't want to. And to my Democratic friends, have President Trump's back. I know you don't like him. I know we disagree. But this is a chance to bring the North Korean program to an end in a way that's good for North Korea, good for the world, good for the United States. The least you can do after writing him a letter is to have his back and to let North Korea know that you would support military force as a last resort. And if you're not willing to do that, you've done more harm than good.
Now, you would think that our friends across the world would agree with this sentiment. If we were to see denuclearization, this is a huge positive for the world. But when we look at those pictures of the president with Angela Merkel and the other colleagues at the G7 meeting, it looks tense. Once again, we see our friends upset over trade issues, forgetting the major, most important issue we're dealing with right now, and that is a nuclear North Korea. What are your thoughts on the trade story and the president insisting on these tariffs against the European Union, against Canada, Mexico, et cetera, on aluminum and steel?
I will be glad to share that with you, but I want to say something very important here.
Go ahead.
The world got behind President Trump when it came to sanctions on North Korea. The United Nations, Russia, and China adopt sanctions against the North Korean regime because their missile program is getting out of control. They're developing more bombs and missiles that could hit the American homeland. So I want to compliment China, Russia, and the international community for standing behind President Trump, when it comes to sanctions on North Korea. This will only work if the world will tell North Korea that it's going to come to an end. If diplomacy fails, then military force will be used. It'd be nice to have our allies say that. As to the trade dispute between us, Canada, and Mexico, I was informed by National Security Advisor Bolton last night before I went to bed that they had a good meeting with the G6 plus us, G7, that they had a statement they could support. The president was in a good mood. The Prime Minister of Canada, for some reason, went out and did a news conference, basically throwing it back into the president's face. And the one thing I can tell you that Donald Trump will not tolerate is double dealing. So North Korea is watching this interchange between the United States and the G6. A good deal was had. Everybody was on board. The Canadians went off by themselves, stabbed the president in the back in his mind, and now we're out. He's not going to tolerate being treated like that, nor should he.
Yeah, I want to get back to North Korea in a second, but I want to say that I had an opportunity to speak with President Trump on Friday before he left for the G7, and he wanted me to make it clear that this is a negotiation with regard to trade. He's not done yet. He is in the middle of negotiating, and he is going to get better trade deals with China, with the European Union, with Canada, and with Mexico. So I want to get that out. He also mentioned to me that this has been going on years. He's not necessarily blaming only the Obama administration. He's going back 50 years to look at these trade deals that are really with the U.S. at the losing end of the agreement. So let me ask you this. How did North Korea come to the table? Do you think China was helpful to this president?
Yes, I believe China for the first time saw North Korea as a liability. China, there would be no nuclear program in North Korea without China. There would be no North Korean economy without China. 90% of all trade between North Korea is with China. All their military equipment comes from China. What happened? Donald Trump came in early on and said, listen, this is going to end on my watch. Everybody before me kicked the can down the road. I'm not going to try to contain the missile program, contain the nuclear weapons on top of a missile. I'm going to eliminate them. I prefer a peaceful resolution, a win-win deal to eliminate North Korea's nuclear threat to the United States and the world. And I think China believes Trump. Here's the question. Will the Democrats who wrote the letter outlining what a good deal looks like, will they support the president to make sure he can get the best deal possible by telling North Korea, we're not going to play these stupid games anymore. If you don't take this deal, if we can't make it a win-win, we're going to use force and you're going to lose a war with the United States over your nuclear program. Survivability cannot be had by having nuclear weapons that can hit America. The only way you'll survive is to give up your nuclear weapons and your missiles. And
that, because he was afraid of that was one of the pushes to get him to the table. And it is connected with trade. I just want to mention this because what I'm also understanding is that President Xi of China called President Trump directly and asked him to help him with ZTE 2 weeks before this summit.
Right.
So you've got a call from the president of China asking President Trump for help with the telecom company of ZTE 2 weeks before he's about to go face-to-face with North Korea. This is all connected. That's perhaps one of the reasons that the president thought he needed to do something for ZTE.
I think you're right. I think the president has convinced China that North Korea is a liability, not an asset. Right. China likes it when North Korea keeps us off balance and creates chaos in the world.
Yes.
But they would not like a war in China's backyard between the United States and North Korea, because we would win the war, North Korea would lose, and it would be devastating for the region, the world, particularly China.
Right.
Now,
Senator,
to help.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I want to take a quick break because you're going to get the first crack at Michael Horowitz. I want to turn to that. So stay with us, Senator Graham. You're going to talk to us next about that highly anticipated DOJ watchdog, the IG report, and this upcoming testimony. Back in a minute. Welcome back, and I am back with Senator Lindsey Graham. And Senator, you were making a point about North Korea. Please finish your point before we move on to the DOJ.
So the president of China calls President Trump, says, help me with ZTE. It's a big Chinese tech company that employs a lot of Chinese. They were found to violate Iran sanctions. I'd be open-minded to doing a deal with ZTE if we could make sure it's not a bad deal for America. Wilbur Ross is coming up with ways to make ZTE a more reliable person to do group to do business with in the United States. We'll see where that goes.
Yeah,
as to my Democratic friends, you've laid out what a good deal would look like. There are three endings to how the North Korea nuclear missile threat. Peace, where everybody wins. War, where North Korea loses, which would be devastating for the region, but it would end their program. Capitulation by Donald Trump, where he just gives up like every other president. The third one's not going to happen. So if you want to make sure peace prevails, then tell North Korea and China that as a last resort, you would support the use of military force. If you're not willing to do that, we're probably not going to have peace, and you're undercutting the president.
Meanwhile, you are getting your first crack at Michael Horowitz, the IG.
Yeah.
The DOJ Inspector General Horowitz announcing he will release his report on the FBI's handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation this upcoming week on June 14th. Horowitz has accepted an invitation from the Senate Judiciary Committee to testify about that report a few days later. Tell us what you'd like to hear. That is your committee who will speak with Michael Horowitz.
Mr. Horowitz, you have a good reputation. You've been in this business for a long time. Do you believe the way the FBI handled the Clinton email investigation, it was on the up and up? Do you believe it was fair? Do you believe they were in the tank for Clinton and hated Trump? Was it really a serious investigation, or was it a politically compromised? As to the FISA warrant, do you believe it was appropriate for the Democratic Party to hire a foreign agent to go to Russia to get dirt on candidate Trump, and the FBI and the DOJ use that dossier that's never been verified to get a warrant against an American citizen? I want to hear him say, one way or the other, whether or not the Clinton email investigation was professionally done on the up and up, and what he thinks about the FISA warrant.
Senator, do you believe laws were broken?
Yeah, I do. I believe that Michael Steele, who was the confidential informant used by the FBI and the Department of Justice to prepare the dossier, was told, or he told the FBI, I'm not talking to the press, and actually he did. I think he gave false information to the FBI. I want to ask Mr. Horowitz that. Do you believe laws were broken? I really worry about how this dossier was used to get a warrant on an American citizen. I don't know if the checks and balances that exist around FISA, if they need to be made stronger. But I want to know, did these two FBI agents in charge of the Clinton email investigation, were they in the tank? And the final thing I want to know, who is Andy? Who is the person called Andy that the Strzok and Page met with to get an insurance policy when it came to the 2016 election?
Yeah, and we all have assumed that was Andrew McCabe, but we'll get more when you speak with him. Senator, it's good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Senator Lindsey Graham, we've got a lot more reaction to that forthcoming Inspector General report, as House lawmakers are also preparing to question the Inspector General at a joint hearing next week. The chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Bob Goodlatte, is next. Welcome back. Inspector General Michael Horowitz not only expected to testify next week before the Senate Judiciary Committee, but also in a joint hearing before both the House Judiciary and Government Reform Committees. All this on his highly anticipated report on the Justice Department and the FBI's handling of the Clinton email investigation. Joining me right now is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Virginia Congressman Bob Goodlatte. Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for joining us.
Maria, it's great to be with you.
What should we expect from this IG report, which is expected to drop on the 14th, on Thursday?
Well, I think this is going to be a very thorough report. It's been a long time in the making. I know the Inspector General has examined thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of documents to get to this point. And I think it's going to shed a lot of light on what the Judiciary Committee and the Oversight and Government Reform Committee have been investigating for the past 8 months. And that is this unbelievable bias on the part of our nation's premier law enforcement organization, the several leaders at the top of the organization, in handling one investigation, Hillary Clinton's, compared to an investigation into the so-called Trump-Russia collusion, about which so far there has been no evidence brought forth.
Exactly. So do you believe there were laws broken, sir?
I do believe that there have been laws broken. I think that the matter with regard to Andrew McCabe and leaks related to that reflect on that. But I also think that there are a number of other things that we have uncovered, examining the Peter Strzok, Lisa Page texts, for example, that show activities within the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation that I hope the Inspector General's report will shed light on and may make it clear whether or not criminal laws have been violated. But certainly one thing is very clear, and that is that the Federal Bureau of Investigation needed a house cleaning. The current new director, Christopher Wray, has been doing that. I think he's made great progress. And we need to make sure that this never happens again. We've got the 2020 presidential elections coming up in not too long a time. And it's very, very important that the FBI gets back to its protocols with regard to how it conducts investigations, particularly ones as sensitive as these have been.
Yeah, Devin Nunes came on this program a month ago or a month and a half ago and said, we've done our digging and we've done our due diligence, and now we know that there was actually no official intelligence used to actually launch an investigation into Donald Trump. And here we have the special counsel continuing. So let me ask you, do you believe there will be an accountability at the end of the day? You don't have the authority to prosecute. The Inspector General doesn't have the authority to actually prosecute. So how will there be accountability?
Well, I think there already has been accountability to some extent based upon the people who are no longer at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, including the director and the deputy director. But I also think that this report is going to shed additional light and put some of the pieces together because he's had the opportunity to examine more documents than any of the committees in Congress have been able to examine to this point. So we're very interested in seeing this. We will examine it. We will have a hearing. Part of that hearing will be classified, so we can get into the classified aspects of his report, but we're also going to have a public hearing so that the public can learn as much as possible about this investigation, and we will have the Inspector General there to answer our questions.
So what happens now in terms of the referrals of criminal charges? The last IG report from Michael Horowitz recommended criminal charges against Andrew McCabe, the #2 deputy director at the FBI. This weekend, Jim Comey has been taunting the president on Twitter, basically taking shots at him over the relationship between the U.S. and Canada. And we are expecting that there could be some real significant issues brought up about Jim Comey in this upcoming IG report. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of what happens next?
Well, two things. First of all, the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, did appoint United States Attorney Huber from Utah to look into the matters also being looked into by the Inspector General. He does have prosecutorial authority, and he can make referrals the Inspector General can make referrals for prosecution. So if there is evidence of criminal wrongdoing, and I believe we've seen some already, as you just referenced, the Inspector General's reference with regard to Andrew McCabe, we will see that happen. But the question is, who will actually do that prosecuting? Will it be Mr. Huber, or do we need somebody who is completely independent of the Department of Justice? Mr. Huber got the matter outside of what we call main justice, outside of Washington, D.C. But I think, and many others in the Congress continue to think, that we need to have an independent special counsel, separate and apart from the work that Mr. Mueller is doing, to handle these potential criminal referrals and to look into this matter for the possibility of finding further matters beyond what the Inspector General does.
All right, we'll talk more about this once that IG report hits on Thursday. We're going to have a lot on that on the Fox Business Network on the morning show, Mornings with Maria. Let me turn to your immigration bill. Will it ever get to the floor?
I think it is coming to the floor. It is coming to the floor this month. And the discussions that we've been having in the Congress, we had a very important House Republican conference this past week where 40, 50 members of the conference got up and spoke. There is a lot of desire to work together to pass a bill. We've had some negotiations going on led by our leadership, but with people from across the spectrum of the conference in the room. And I think that that is going to yield yield a bill that can get 218 votes. A lot of the things that are in the legislation that I introduced, along with Mike McCall, chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Raul Labrador, chairman of the Immigration Subcommittee, Martha McSally, chairman of the Border Security Subcommittee, will be in this bill. But there will be some changes made to it as well. And our hope is that this will get 218 votes. It'll turn off the discharge petition, which is a very bad way to legislate and would likely lead to a very unbalanced bill where the Democrats would effectively control that process, joining with a small number of Republicans to pass something that is not going to become law. This effort that we have ongoing right now has the prospect of actually becoming law. And I think that we should continue to be all hands on deck, like all of the conferences fully engaged in this now, to get this done and get this done this month.
All right. We will see about that. Is it fair to say, though, nothing happens on immigration before the midterm elections, though, sir?
Well, I think we'll have a bill out of the House very soon. That'll put a lot of pressure back on the United States Senate because this is an issue, both in terms of solving the problem for the DACA recipients and for doing the president's 4 pillars, making sure our borders are secure, interior enforcement, and moving away from chain migration to a merit-based system. These are things that the American people want and can get. Mr.
Chairman, good to see you, sir. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Maria.
We will be watching the developments. Bob Goodlatte, the Trump-Kim summit, tariffs and trade, and the fate of NAFTA. Who better to talk with about all of that than the former Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, my guest, next, right here on set, as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures.
Retailer near you.
Welcome back. President Trump arriving in Singapore for his high-stakes summit with Kim Jong-un on Tuesday. The president expressed some optimism going into this meeting, saying that he's hoping at a minimum to start a dialogue with North Korea. Let's bring in former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, another author of the upcoming book, Right Here, Right Now, Politics and Leadership in the Age of Disruption. Great title, Mr. Prime Minister. It's good to see you again.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask you about your book, certainly, but when you look at these pictures of the president stepping down in Singapore, about to meet with North Korea's dictator, what's your reaction?
Look, I was just in the region, and, I think President Trump gets a lot of credit for bringing it this far. It's been an interesting use of carrots and sticks. That said, I'm not telling you anything that would surprise you in saying that allies in the region are pretty skeptical of the North Koreans. So we'll see what happens, but it's an interesting development.
Just the fact that he got to the table has to be seen as a positive, right? I mean, there's a lot to do, obviously. Do you believe that we could actually see denuclearization?
My own time in office, I learned to be quite a skeptic of the North Koreans. But here they are at the table, and President Trump's made it clear he's not going to accept a half deal or a weak deal. So let's hope something comes of it.
So what's your take on the conversations that have been taking place around trade? Yeah. It looked like an icy relationship there between the president and Justin Trudeau, the new Canadian Prime Minister, because of failed talks over NAFTA. What should a NAFTA deal look like? What are your thoughts around this?
Look, I tell people that we try and understand. In Canada, we try and understand the American perspective. I can understand why President Trump, why the American people feel they need some better trade relationships. If they wanted to take on the relationship with China, even some aspects of the relationship with Mexico around autos, I'd be, the first person telling our government to be a partner in those things, because I think Canada shares those concerns. I don't understand the obsession with, trade relations with Canada. Not only is the trade deficit with Canada small, the United States runs a current account surplus with Canada. Canada is the biggest single purchaser of U.S. goods and services in the world. It's not China, it's not Mexico, it's not Britain, it's not Germany, it's Canada. So, it just seems to me this is the wrong target. And from what I understand of American public opinion, I don't think even Trump supporters think the Canadian trade relationship is a problem.
Could it be that it's so different from what we have with Mexico and he can't get a deal between the three together, so maybe a bilateral is better? Because in order to do a new deal with Canada on NAFTA, you got to have Mexico agreeing to it. I mean, could that be it?
Look, I'm not in a position to try and direct the trade negotiations of the government of Canada. All I say is this, that this is a vitally important relationship that we have between Canada and the United States. And, you know, look, when I was in office with President Bush, with President Obama, from time to time we had disagreements on issues. With President Obama, we disagreed on the Keystone Pipeline. Ultimately, President Trump made a great decision on that. But, you know, the important thing is...
You stood tall on that. You were strong on that. You got a lot of pushback from the Obama team. I remember that.
Well, look, and that's fair enough. But what we did do, what Canadian presidents and prime ministers, American presidents have done in the past, is that when we've had those disagreements, we keep those disagreements isolated to the issues we're disagreeing with. Because on other things, you know, international issues of security, of, frankly, economic relationships and trade, of democracy and values, we're on the same page. We're the closest partners in the world. And you don't want to see a dispute over one particular issue poison everything.
Well, what about an idea around autos, something different there? The idea of origination. Where should the car originate in terms of production? That's where the jobs are. That's one of the things this president has been pushing. Would that be something that you believe could be tinkered with? You
know, look, as I said before, I think there's lots of opportunity for Canada and the United States to partner on areas where we share basic trade concerns. I think in the case of the auto sector, I worked with the Bush and Obama administrations to help bail out that sector during the global financial crisis. Then the sector starts moving to Mexico. I think that's a concern we both share. But, you know, I don't see any fundamental problem in the Canadian-American trade relationship. This is a more or less balanced relationship, and one that's vitally important to businesses and consumers on both sides of the border, and one that Trump supporters have no problem with.
Yeah, I want to take a short break. When we come back, I want to ask you about the G7 meeting. You've been at these meetings before, and the president made a remark about Russia. The one I got to get your take on that. We'll be right back with former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, get his reaction to the president saying that Russia should be reinstated to make it to the G8 once again. Stay with us.
Now, I love our country. I have been Russia's worst nightmare. If Hillary got in, I think Putin is probably going, man, I wish Hillary won, because you see what I do. But with that being said, Russia should be in this meeting. Why are we having a meeting without Russia being in the meeting? And I would recommend, and it's up to them, but Russia should be in the meeting. It should be a part of it.
That was President Trump saying that Russia should be included in the G8 once again. Now it's the G7 because Russia was kicked out. I'm back with former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And my guest today, Mr. Prime Minister, you were among the leadership that led the charge against pushing Russia out of the G8. Is that right?
I was. Look, I diplomatically disagree with the president on this. I don't think that could be more the wrong direction. The fact of the matter is this. I watched two American presidents, very different people with very different agendas, President Bush, President Obama. I watched them try and make a strategic partner of Vladimir Putin. And they couldn't. And the reason they couldn't is because Vladimir Putin does not want to be a strategic partner of the United States and the West. He is determined, right to his core, to be a strategic opponent. The purpose of the G7, in my mind, is to bring together the most important Western allies in the world, the big economies who share strategic interests, who share basic questions of value. Vladimir Putin is in none of those categories. And in fact, the reason I pushed, even before his invasion of Crimea, the reason I pushed for his expulsion was that, frankly, he inhibited open dialogue around the table among allies because you simply couldn't trust anything he said or anything he did. You know, this is a man, let's be frank, he's a very impressive guy in many ways, but this is a man who kills his political opponents. You know, there's no place around an allied table for somebody like that.
So you are uncomfortable with the idea that they would be back into the G8. You also are questioning why we're picking a fight with Canada. You say that the Canadian people are worried.
Yeah, well, look, our relationship is vitally important to this country. There's a reason why for 100 years You know, we've been the closest partner of the United States in the fights against imperialism, fascism, communism, and today, you know, international jihad, Islamic extremism, and terrorism. And it's because we share vital interests. We have a great balanced trade relationship that benefits people on both sides of the border, that business is overwhelmingly supportive of. As I say, the president wants to take on the trade relationship with China. I think he's absolutely right to do that. I think the government of Canada should be a partner in that. He has some concerns, certain aspects of the Mexican relationship around autos. I absolutely understand why that is. Government of Canada, in my judgment, should be a partner in those things. But us fighting over, you know, our trade relationship when the Chinese have a 4-to-1 imbalance with both of us is, in my judgment, just the wrong priority.
So you agree on the China pushback. You also agree on the Iran deal.
I absolutely agree
what
with
he
the
did with
president.
Taking the U.S. out of the Iran deal.
I absolutely agree with that. Look, I understand why. I thought the deal was weak from the beginning. I understand why the previous administration did it. They felt that if you normalized relations, normalized this, you know, had this deal, normalized relations, you'd get a less belligerent Iran, one that would gravitate to better relations with its neighbors, with the world. But the opposite happened, Maria. Once we signed this deal, Iran became more belligerent. Iran began to use the money from that deal to fund even more its military and terrorist allies around the region. This is why every ally in every country in the region supported the president on canceling the Iran nuclear deal. It was the right thing to do. I think it was a courageous thing to do, and I congratulate him for it.
You have to believe that Iran is watching how the president deals with North Korea.
Absolutely.
So what are you expecting out of this historic meeting? Obviously, this is the first time that the U.S. president will face off against North Korea and its leader.
Honestly, I'm not sure what to expect. I know the president has, as I say, used a really interesting mix of carrot and sticks to get Kim Jong-un to the table. You know, on the other hand, in the past, when we've seen Korean peace efforts or initiatives before, North Korean peace efforts, they've always, frankly, been disguising their move to the next level of militarization and nuclearization.
We can't trust them.
We can't trust them.
Right.
So, look, but on the other hand, as I say, the president is not a fool, and he's going to be tough with these guys, and hopefully, you know, through the Iran cancellation of the Iran deal, they're getting the signal.
Mr. Prime Minister, this is all going to be discussed in your upcoming book.
Some of it will be discussed. My book is more about what's kind of happening in the world of Western politics and Western society generally. When we see just tremendous disruption, but now political disruption. Populist movements, what's happened here in the United States with Trump and with President Trump and with Bernie Sanders, the Democratic Party. I talk about why this is happening and really what we need to do about it. I'm looking at this from a conservative angle, what we as conservatives need to do to make sure that we address the concerns that our people are raising and address those concerns with good conservative principles and values.
Really looking forward to the book. Prime Minister Harper, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Stephen Harper there. Lots of developments to digest this week. As we look ahead to the week ahead, our panel is next as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures. Back in a moment. Welcome back. President Trump arriving in Singapore earlier this morning for this historic summit with Kim Jong-un. We want to bring in our panel on that note. Ed Rollins is the former campaign manager for the Reagan-Bush ticket in 1984. James Freeman is the assistant editor at the Wall Street Journal's editorial page. Both are Fox News contributors, and it's a pleasure to see you both.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Your thoughts on this historic meeting, Ed?
It's a critical meeting. The next 48 hours is probably the most critical part of Trump's presidency to date. I think he has to pass a message, and the message is, listen, we're neighbors. We can be neighbors in the world. You can't throw beer cans in my backyard when I'm barbecuing. And if you continue to do that, I'm going to burn your house down. That's the message in a very simple way. And if you be a good neighbor, we won't let anybody else burn your house down.
That is funny. that is a good message. And this right after he met with all of the other world leaders who he just basically put new tariffs on, James. So you went from the G7 to Singapore.
Yeah, if you go with the solo cups, maybe avoid the beer can problem. But I think in the G7 context, I think to me the most encouraging moment in a very odd weekend was the president saying, we want a free trade zone with our friends in the G7. No tariffs, no subsidies, no protection for individual industries. You never really know. If that's his goal, that's good news.
Saying it's a free trade zone.
Yeah.
Well, because he's basically saying we're already in a trade war. The U.S. has been at a disadvantage for decades.
Yeah, but you never, given his statement, sometimes you're not sure what his goal really is. Is it to put up more barriers in the U.S.? Is it to try and manage the numbers of exports and imports? You don't want government doing that. And this was a statement to say, no, this is really pointed toward freedom to trade, and that is good news, that's the goal.
And even though I admire that and I want that to happen eventually, it's very tough politically. And I think the key thing here that we don't talk much about, agriculture is a very, very important entity. And obviously agriculture to Republicans is very important. That's our constituency base, the Midwest, what have you. And my sense is there wasn't much dialogue about that. We're not going to have a friend on the new government of Mexico, in all probability, is not going to be friendly towards us. The Canadians will come back, I'm sure, to the table, but you can't call them too many more names.
But, you could talk about agricultural products all day long and our friends buying more of them. But I know James and I both agree that does nothing for the more important issues of the day, and that is the theft of intellectual property and the forced transfer of technology with China. Everybody agrees that this pushback against China was the right move.
It was the right move. We shouldn't have backed off on my sense on the.
And let ZTE back in.
We should not.
Well, as we were talking earlier in the program, the president told me that one of the reasons is that President Xi of China called him directly and said, I need a favor. I need your help on this 2 weeks before the North Korean summit. I mean.
Yeah, this was their big, and you heard it directly, this was the big ask from China. It means a lot to them. It's a huge telecom player. It obviously collapses without the ability to use U.S. technology. I think the question is, did the president really get something good in return, or is he going to? Does he think he's got a favor that is now going to be repaid from the Chinese leadership? And we'll see in North Korea.
And it's very important. If we set sanctions, you can't violate the sanctions. And that's what this whole issue was. They had sanctions against Iran, sanctions against North Korea, and they violated them. You've got to have the promise you're not going to violate our sanctions.
What does this all mean for the midterm elections, Ed? I mean, we've been talking about a blue wave happening. Is that still on the cards?
There's no blue wave. There's a very competitive environment. Republicans' disadvantage is obviously the historical disadvantage. We have an advantage in the Senate. We have a lot of Senate candidates on their side. The House, we have, unfortunately, 44 members. It's still a dead even race. We can still hold it if we do. But candidates have to run on his agenda, not their own agenda.
All right. We will leave it there. James Freeman, Ed Rollins, great to see you both, gentlemen. Thank you so much. That'll do it for us on Sunday Morning Futures. I'll see you tomorrow morning on the Fox Business Network. Mornings with Maria, 6 to 9 a.m.